Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. In this episode we'll be dealing with Nichol Kessinger wanting to be first in Chris Watts' life. Although this doesn't seem like a revelation and it doesn't seem at face value like we can learn anything from this almost self-evident idea, we need to be humble when it comes to true crime, and as soon as we aren't humble and as soon as we think we sort of know everything about a case, then it's very hard to fill a cup that's already full. And when we're dealing with things like family dynamics and relationship dynamics, that's almost like an infinite journey, because people that you don't know, they have a whole universe they have a whole world of feelings and context that even if you start from scratch, it's going to take you a really long time to become familiar with them, and then that's just one person. Then there's another person, then it's going to take you a really long time to get to know their layers and their dynamics. And arguably we've done that with Shanann Watts, and we've done that to an extent with Chris Watts. But what about Nichol Kessinger? What do we know about her? And as you sort of broaden this sort of universe, it gets more and more complex, all these sort of orreries of personal galaxies that are sort of interacting with one another. And it does become incredibly complex. In theory, you're never going to know even half of all of it. You may get a sort of detailed view, almost like a Hubble telescope snapshot. You're never going to get a real sense of this sort of sparkling cosmology, if I can put it that way, and the actual dance of the stars, of these real people interacting as they really did. It's incredibly difficult to do, and it's an area that people seldom do just because it's so hard to really get to know other people, and then also how they interact in an authentic way with one another. It's very easy to cast aspersions and to project ourselves. That's the easy way, that you can snap your fingers and you don't need to do any research, and you just it's off the top of your head. But you actually go and sort of anchor your narrative in them, and in facts, and in dates, and in information, and in research. That's a lot harder, and it's quite time consuming. So in this episode we're going to be dealing with this whole idea of wanting to be first, and again, you might think what that actually means. I do want to recommend that if you haven't already watched Chris and Shanann Watts Unequally Yoked, you should watch it immediately after this video, as well as Detagate. That will give you a lot of value in terms of an additional context in terms of this video. If on the other hand you have watched those, then this is going to be quite a powerful episode. Okay, and so to get into it, it's something that we can all identify with. It's on a lot of people's social media, this idea of never settle for second best, only the best for yourself, and if you look at the characters in this case, especially Shanann didn't settle for second best, which is why everything she had was the best house, an expensive car, an expensive school for her kids, a husband at her beck and call, a dream job, etc., etc. But what happens when what's best for you isn't someone else's idea of what's best for them? What if what's best for the other person isn't you? What should that person do? After all, Isn't this all about making 100% sure you get what you deserve? Which is for you to be the number one person, not only in your life, but in someone else's life. Isn't that the fairy tale? But what if your fairy tale for you, in a given situation, isn't someone else's fairy tale for them? And once again, I want to refer you to the video which is at the blog post. Just watch that and think of it through the prism, through the lens of being first. And you can watch it once through the lens of Shanann being first. You can watch it once through the lens of Shanann kind of putting her children first, and then watch it through the lens of Chris Watts. Okay. Unusually in this episode, we're going to be interpreting this idea of being first not from Shanann's perspective, nor even from Watts' perspective. We're going to follow the psychology from the perspective of the mistress. Now, if Nutgate was about Shanann knowing what is best for her child, and perhaps for her inner child, Dietergate was about Nichol Kessinger knowing what is best for herself. Dietergate happened when Kessinger went to the Watts home. On the first visit, Watts made lunch for them, and according to the discovery, when Tammy Lee asked, this is the second, on the occasion of the second confession at the prison, when Tammy Lee asked, did they ever fight? Watts sort of minimized it, saying, well, they never fought, but he kind of had to calm Kessinger down. And that is actually what an argument is, where someone gets very agitated, very emotional, very upset. And but what I think what is acknowledging here is he didn't argue with her, but she got very upset. But that is like an argument, especially from the other person's perspective. The discovery goes on to say Kessinger got upset when she realized she would always be the other person, and Watts would always put his wife first. And so the occasion of this was literally when Kessinger set foot in the Watts home for the first time. She suddenly realized, wow, this is what's going on here. And the discovery literally says that. It says the first incident where Kessinger realized he put his wife first was when he left her house on July 4th, 2018. And this was the day after her birthday. Shanann had made quite a few calls. I can't remember if it was to deal with Vivint then, but Shanann had called him a lot, and Watts knew that if he didn't respond to her calls, they would be held to pay. And Kessinger probably wasn't very familiar with the dynamic with Watts and his wife. So if Watts was sort of jumping when Shanann said jump, it didn't necessarily mean she didn't have priority, but Kessinger didn't know that. And so Watts told Kessinger just because he had to leave didn't mean she needed to take a step back. But that is what it looked like, and that is what it felt like. And Watts probably sort of reflected on that as well. He probably reflected that no matter what imminence Kessinger had in his inner world, in his life, he was going to have to deal with the fact that Shanann had the potential to dominate. She had the potential to dominate their relationship from afar. And Kessinger was feeling it, and he was well aware of it, and he was even more aware of it because he'd lived it. And so this was a threat to their affair. It was a threat to their relationship. And it was so bad that Kessinger sort of told him, this was on July 4th, that she thought it was better they didn't see each other the rest of the day. Now, again, you have this disagreement which leads to Kessinger leaving him on this day where he'd cooked lunch for her. and then you say, well, was that not an argument? Was that not them not fighting? I mean, this is what was asked if they ever fought, and he said they never fought. But Kessinger leaving him that day, it felt like an argument to her. It felt like they'd fought to her, right? The other aspect that's interesting is, and this is revealed in the audio of the second confession, is that when Kessinger left to go and watch a baseball game, she was supposed to meet this is according to what she was supposed to meet someone that she'd set up on a eHarmony date, and he didn't pitch up, and so Kessinger was sort of stood up in this. So in other words, it seemed like it was an argument, and then Kessinger sort of went.
Did you and Nikki ever fight?
We never fought, but like I said, I had to like calm her down a bunch of times.
Yeah, you started to mention that when we were talking to you before about her getting upset about some video or something about being bipolar, or what are you talking about?
I think either my dad told me about that or John Walsh told me about, like, she made a couple videos like when she was just like, talking to herself, saying that she was bipolar or something like that. But a lot of the things was like when she realized that, okay, like, she's the other person in the relationship, that I'd always put my wife first over her, and that's what kind of made her take a step back a few times, and then like I had to kind of like calm her down.
Tell me about those times. What'd that look like?
So the first one was probably around July 4th when I had to leave her house because she wanted to kind of spend most of the day together before she went to like a baseball game or something, and like when I had to leave, it kind of just made her like kind of take a step back and wonder what she was doing. And I just, told her, like, hey, just because of what's going, like, just because I had to leave doesn't mean, like, you have to just take a step. I was like, comforting her at some point. I don't even know why I was doing it. Maybe I knew I was too far gone at that point, but it was...
Because this is Shanann's pissed. She's called you 10 times. You were sleeping because you had your day off. Yeah. And then you go outside to talk to her on the phone and then tell Nikki that you need to go home just in case she calls back and all that, right? Mm-hmm. So what did she say to you, Nikki?
She was in the shower and she said, okay. And then that's like, when I talked about, I calm her down, she's on the phone. So.
And was she like, we're breaking up, like, we're not gonna, I can't do this?
No, she said, like, she didn't want to, like, she didn't think it was safe or it was good for us to see each other anymore that day, like the rest of that day, just because of all that. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then she asked me to come over, like, later on after she got back from her baseball game.
And so you did that? Mm-hmm. So what was the second one like?
It was basically about the same thing. She was, I didn't really know it at one point, but I guess she had set up a couple dates with like some eHarmony app or something, and they never showed up. And she'd already made plans with me, and
Wait, what do you mean? She set up dates when she had plans with you?
Yeah.
Why would she do that?
I guess she kind of figured out they weren't going to show up. She went, I guess when she went to the baseball game, they never showed up, and there was another one, and never showed up either.
So she's actively dating other people while you guys
I didn't know
together?
it until like a couple weeks later.
And how'd you find out?
She told me.
What'd she say?
It was one conversation where I actually kind of fell asleep on the couch, and then like she had told me, like, I'm not sure why she even told me about it, but it was really random, and she could tell that it kind of like took me back a little bit, because I figured she would have told me that if she was actively still like looking around. I mean, she didn't have to tell me, but I figured she would.
Do you think she told you though so that it would hurry you up and
make a decision?
You're making a decision?
It might have been, but
and it's a very expensive Lexus, and then they live in a pretty expensive house.
It's a huge house.
Yeah,
I was very taken back when I saw it. I was just like, whoa. How
and
do
then
you
the
guys...
fixtures inside caused you to pause.
Everything was just like...
And then you mentioned today you read something about...
Kessinger was sort of stood up in this... So in other words, it seemed like it was an argument, and then Kessinger sort of went ahead with another date, and this guy didn't turn up, and then she sort of went back to what... So in a way, what was happening was, even though she desperately wanted to be first, she wasn't necessarily making him first, or put in another way, when there was a setback, then she was quite quick to put somebody else first. Now you can imagine if Watts was aware of this, he could sort of feel he absolutely has to show his mistress that she's first. He absolutely has to demonstrate that there's nothing to be afraid of, because she might cut and run at any second. And you might think that that's a fragile relationship, or there's not much holding that relationship together. Well, yes and no. I mean, there was a lot in his heart that was invested. But yeah, certainly that was the whole point of it, was to make sure that wouldn't be the case. In other words, he was trying to set up the relationship to be a relationship, right? But the second visit 2 weeks later was very different. Kessinger admits in an interview that she was impressed by the house, even awed by it, and probably even more than a little intimidated by what she saw at face value. So I'm just going to go through the discovery on page 569, which deals quite frankly and fairly honestly with what Nichole's impressions were when she went to the house on the second time. So again, this is discovery page 569. She says both times were very brief, so she's kind of minimizing it, that even though she was at the house, it wasn't for a very long time. She says she did not feel comfortable there, and that is someone else's life and existence. In other words, the house is a symbol of someone else's life, and she didn't want to be there. I think that's somewhat true, and somewhat kind of maybe a euphemism. I think it's true that she didn't feel comfortable there, in the sense that she was confronted with the discomfort of another woman and his children and a whole other life that was going on. And bear in mind, this was easily halfway through their relationship. So, at least 3 weeks into their relationship, she sets foot in the house, and suddenly it's like a reality check. And it's in a way that's creating uncertainty and anxiety and fear, and in this sense she didn't feel comfortable. Did she feel comfortable with him? Sure. Did she enjoy maybe the lunch she had the first time there? So it's I don't think she just entered the house, didn't feel comfortable, and leave, which is almost how this is conveyed. And I also don't think it's that she had this immediate respect. I think it is more that she felt intimidated. It does say in the discovery she respected that as their space. In other words, she respected the house as their space. Again, if that's true, would she have gone back a second time? Right? And also, according to the information that's out there, she had lunch, or what's cooked lunch on the 4th, and in the second visit, if the version that we're getting is correct, she went upstairs. So she was comfortable enough to wander around the house, right, and to look at the photos. She also says she went to the house very early in the relationship. Well, on July 4th it was somewhat early, but July 14th it was basically halfway through the relationship. So interestingly, Kessinger notes that it looked like others lived there. So it's kind of just a strange statement to make, that to her it seemed like others lived there. But I guess what she's getting at is there's the reality dawning that the people he's mentioned aren't just sort of hypotheticals. They have beds, they have rooms, they have clothes, they have lives, they have personalities, they have a connection to this person that she has a connection to, and they don't know anything about her, right? And then at the time, and I think this is during the first visit, he told her he was living in the basement and that they were separated but not divorced. This is difficult to analyze in a sense, because is she saying he was living in the basement to reassure the investigators, or is she saying it to reassure herself, or did he say it to reassure her, or was he in fact living in the basement? Because he wasn't living in the basement, he was staying at her house every night for the entire month of July. So when was he living in the basement? We know there's a bed in the basement, but that bed wasn't really there for him. It was there for the Ruseks, and I'm going to do a video on that, a little clip on that as well. That's where they stayed. So the bed wasn't really there for him. There was a sort of a gym apparatus in the basement, but one wouldn't say that's living in the basement. That's working out in the basement, and no more than that. So if we go to the next paragraph, the last one on Discovery, page 569, that refers to the weekend of July 14th. In this situation, where she's giving the interview to Kevin Kobach, the CBI agent, it seems like she's unsure if it was the 14th or the 15th. Maybe she's unsure, but it's hard to believe, because that was quite a seminal event. It was quite a stand-out incident that happened on that particular day. And so it's the day she went to his house for the second time, and that time she saw a picture of his wife and one of his kids. Again, and this is only going by the letter of the Discovery, that doesn't seem accurate or completely sincere to say that she saw a picture of his wife and one of his kids. It's almost as if she's saying she saw a single picture. She sort of caught a glimpse of one picture, and it was just of Shanann and one of the children. And the child isn't even named. It's not the older child, it's not Bella, it's just, sort of put in that way. That also seems to be minimizing probably what she did see, and probably what she did see were several pictures, as mentioned in the Dietergate video. There were quite a few family photos. There was the cartoon, there was the plaque with the dates of all the children's birthdays and the wedding date, etc. So the house was filled with photos, so it would be very difficult for her to only see one photo, especially if she went upstairs as well. But what we do have to acknowledge is that in the Discovery, Nichol did say that she questioned why you would want to leave this, and that does ring true. She entered the house, she saw pictures of Shanann and the children, but within the house she sort of felt this sort of fairy tale, and in a strange way Shanann's what do you call it, the charade, in a sense, the charade that she'd created of her home, that there was a happily ever after going on, and that they were thriving and all that kind of thing, that actually succeeded with Kessinger in a way that was quite unfortunate in a way. And it's kind of unfortunate that this thing that wasn't even real did actually convince Kessinger, certainly at face value. And so Nichol questioned him at the time, about why he would want to leave this. And again, the words are quite unemotional and quite sort of straight-laced. Nichol saw this and she questioned him. That's not quite how it worked out. It wasn't quite as unemotional as it's being presented here. And then the discovery goes on to say they talked about him working on his relationship with his wife. And what this is all about is about this idea of who's first. Who's first in reality? Who's first in reality in your life? Who is going to be first in reality when they come back? Where am I going to fit into all of this? And, I know you're saying you're going to leave this, but are you really? Why would you even want to? What is actually going on here? Where do I fit in? What is actually happening? And then they talked about him working on his relationship with his wife. I don't think that's as true as it sounds. As in, I don't think that's about talking about his relationship with his wife. I think it's talking about how does his relationship with his wife affect her, and it's in terms of where do I fit in, am I first? But it's not, it's actually sort of inverted here, where it's almost giving Shanann the benefit of the doubt, or giving Shanann the opportunity to be given priority in the affair, which is not doesn't ring true, does it? I mean, does that ring true? And what's his response, according to Nichol, was that he said they tried working on their relationship and it was not working. Chris described his relationship with Shanann as a contractual agreement and not emotional. And then goes on to say Nichol felt bad about not waiting for him to be completely divorced. Probably at that moment she felt bad, but did she feel bad at the time? Did she feel bad? Did she feel that she should wait for him on the 14th? And maybe she did. Maybe she felt, wow, I don't think I'm part of this. I don't think this is real. And then what was the response? How did Watts respond? Wasn't it to say, no, it is very real, I want it to be very real, I'll make it very real, I'll fix it so that you can see that it's very real, I'll fix it so that you can see that you are first, right? And then when you go on to page 570, it says that Nichol backed away a bit so he would try to fix his relationship with Shanann. Nichol thought he had a beautiful life going and she wanted him to try and fix it. Again, I'm not sure if the letter of that is strictly true, but if you think about it in another way, that Nichol went to his home on July 14th, and this is where it's mentioned. So where in the discovery where it's mentioned that she went to his home, immediately after that she questions whether he would want to leave this. And ultimately we know he didn't leave his house. He changed his mind about moving into an apartment. In the end, he basically kept the house, even though he told everyone that he spoke to Shanann about moving. But ultimately, as things stood at the end, he didn't move out of his home. And I think Nichol even said at the last dinner they had at the Lazy Dog, he had changed his mind about wanting to move into an apartment. So he didn't want to leave his home, or certainly not right then. Okay. In any event, when we juxtapose this whole thing about July 14th, we get the admission from Nichol that she backed away a bit so that he would try to fix his relationship, or convince her that he wasn't, or whatever it was. But I think the most real aspect here is where Nichol says she thought he had a beautiful life going on, and why would he want to leave this? And so you can see how he would need to answer that question. He would need to say to her, I do want to leave this, and I don't have such a beautiful life, and but then Kessinger would feel she needs to be convinced that that's true. And how do you convince someone of that? And the answer is, well, she would want to feel like she's number one. And look at all the hoops that he's got to jump through. He's got to show, well, even though I've got these children, I would rather have a child with you. Even though I've got a house, I'd rather have a house with you. Even though I've got X, Y, Z, I would rather have that with you. And so all of that is something that he's now being obligated to show. So the discovery provides kind of a vanilla version of what actually went on there. We get a tiny glimpse of additional insight into what really happened during that second visit to the house on July 14th by the third confession. So in Letters from Christopher, you actually see the words and you see the scenario sort of playing out, where what's basically discloses that with Kessinger standing in his home, there was a look of despair on her face, and these are the words he uses. That's quite a strong description. It's quite a strong visual. Despair. She's suddenly standing in his house, and she's feeling that, like, everything that she's been hoping for and enjoying isn't real, and she has a sense of insufficiency and despair. And unlike her description to Kobach, where she says, she visited the house briefly, didn't feel comfortable and left, in this version, which we don't know is true, but let's go along with it, Watts then takes her to the couch, which is presumably the loft couch. But anyway, he takes her to the couch, and they sort of lay together on the couch where he comforts her. We don't know whether they took things further than that, but they lay there and he spoke to her, and then Dietergate kind of happened. She couldn't be comforted, and she went outside, and it was sort of quite a long dramatic episode. So you wouldn't know of Kessinger's despair on that second visit from the discovery, nor from Kobach's interview with Kessinger on August 16th. That's not disclosed. And it's interesting when Kobach gives a hypothetical to Kessinger, and I'm going to play that at the end of this. He's basically saying, can you see that Watts was trying to create a situation where you wouldn't know about his wife, you wouldn't know about the pregnancy if she died, and she almost seems to feign ignorance to that. And what you would almost imagine her saying is almost the opposite. You can imagine almost a frank disclosure where she might say, I did want to be first in his life, and maybe that's why he did this. I mean, would that be such a horrible concession to make? It's not her fault that he chose to do what he did in the way that he did it. It may be her fault that she expressed wanting to be a priority to the extent that she did. One could argue with that, but wouldn't anyone else in a similar situation? I'm just saying, within the interrogation, maybe Kessinger could have been a bit more forthcoming just about the dynamics of what she was exerting and the dynamics of what he was responding to. That's all. On page 568, she says they never had any arguments, and again, he says they never had any arguments, and so did she, and this is in terms of the discovery. But these are arguments. These are moments of conflict where the one person is addressing the issue of priority. Where do I come? Am I going to be first? And then you talk and you answer it, but there doesn't seem to be, how are you going to prove it? How are you going to prove that I'm number one? So, incidentally, it was on the same day as this interview that Kessinger surrendered some of Watts's clothing that he'd left at her house, as well as other items of forensic worth. His birthday card to her on July 3rd and his letter written on July 30th, the day before he flew to meet with his family in North Carolina. Again, this is page 568 in the Discovery, dealing with the August 16th, 2018 interview at the Thornton Police Department. And this evidence that Kessinger handed over was really of vital import, and it's kind of strange that it doesn't really come up. You don't really have Kobach holding the cards in his hand, and then sort of questioning Kessinger about the content of them directly, referring to words, referring to all that sort of thing. There's not a sort of immediate sense that she's being held to account about, okay, I'm holding this in my hand, what do you say about that? Dietergate had a profound impact on the affair and on Watts. It was still at the forefront of Watts's mind 2 weeks later, and we know that because of this note. Dietergate was effectively the moment Nichol was confronted for the first time, as I said, by the reality of the Watts family. This shocked her, and her shock and despair in turn caused Watts to panic. That's why Dietergate is so significant. It caused this introverted guy to sort of be dislodged from his shell. It caused him to take action, right? Now, the semantics of that despair matter immensely. What his mistress was communicating was something Watts knew all too well within his family, this feeling of being second. Nichol didn't want that, and Watts understood that. He wanted to make sure she knew how much he cared for her, and he wanted to make sure she wasn't second. Not just that she didn't feel second, but that she wasn't, in reality, second. At first glance, looking at the love note dated July 30th, it reveals about as much as the drone did during its first reconnaissance over Survey 319. And, when we have a look at that image, just of the sort of nondescript, tawny landscape, there's sort of nothing there. It's sort of just this haze, this sort of gauzy fabric with nothing going on. And yet things were going on there. But at first glance, even though it's in plain sight, you don't see it. And I want to juxtapose that to the note of July 30th. You see the note; it's similarly nondescript. There's not much going on there. It's basically just a note saying, remember all these nice things about you. It's kind of a love note. There's nothing particularly significant in this note. Of course, if you don't have context, then that's true. If you do have context, then it's very different. So, for example, if you go back to the drone image, if you know that the GPS coordinates is taking Chris Watts' truck to this site, and you know that Chris Watts has said that he has killed Shanann, then you know there's reason to look more closely at the landscape, and then when you do, what do you see? You see a little area where the soil has been cleared. You see tiny little fragments, black fragments that turn out to be black garbage bags, and then further up you see a tiny little blue rectangle, and that's the bed sheet that comes all the way from the Watts home. That can be linked to the bed that Shanann was supposed to have slept in. And so when you apply that to the note, and you look more closely at the note, and you've now got the context of Nichol wanting to be first, you suddenly see that the word first appears in the second sentence, where what says, the first day I saw you, you took my breath away. The word first appears in the second sentence, the third sentence. The first day I had the guts to talk to you, I got lost in those stunning green eyes. Very next sentence, the first day we hung out in the park together, I knew I was addicted. That's the third instance of it. In the very next sentence, he uses the word first again. The first time we kissed, I knew I had met the most amazing, unique and electric woman ever, with emphasis. So yeah, you have the word first repeated 4 times in a row in consecutive sentences. Well, virtually, yeah. And then the fifth instance, he says, we have had a lot of firsts together, Nikki, and he writes first in all caps, and that's kind of the sort of encapsulating what he said there. He's sort of saying, just through words, we have had a lot of firsts. You've had firsts with me. And then he summarizes that with a sort of final comment to say, and I want to keep having them with you, 2 exclamation marks. And obviously what he's saying there is, I want to keep having firsts with you, right? So all in all, if you put them together, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 references to firsts, and that's 6 references in about 86 words, so excluding the lyrics at the end. So you're basically having one instance every 17 words of the word first, or basically 1 out of every 2 sentences. And this is why context is so important. Even in a YouTube video like this, you can focus on something and it's significant, but how does it fit into everything else? And that's something that a narrative does much better than a sort of a 20-minute video or 40-minute video or an hour-long video. Someone recently left a message saying, would you mind making your video shorter? I only have a attention span of so long. Yeah, certainly for the format of YouTube, that makes sense. But when you're dealing with true crime, you really want to link up as much as you can. It's about context. It's about connecting evidence. It's about a story that's been fragmented by a lot of the players in it purposefully, where a lot of the details are hidden, and to unhide them, one's got to make all of these connections. And making a little connection in a vacuum doesn't really reveal what needs to be seen. So you want to make the connections really explicit and put the fragments together into something that's at least going to reveal, your puzzle's at least going to reveal part of a bigger picture. You don't really want to just talk about a little piece of a puzzle all day. That's not really true crime, and it's not really going to give you any insight. So let me take that into a practical explanation. So this note that seems so nondescript suddenly takes on a totally new meaning when we see that it was written on the 30th of July, and bear in mind he's about to leave for North Carolina. He likely slept at Kessinger's home before departing very early the next morning for the airport. We know that he departed very early because it's in the phone data review, and we know it was around about 3-4 o'clock in the morning that he had to be at the airport to catch a flight that was at around about 5 or 6 a.m. You can confirm that. You can confirm those details by going to crimerocket2.com, hitting the What's tab and scrolling down to the hashtag dealing with July 31st. So that's going to sort of give you a summary of the phone data review and all the relevant dates, right? in any event, Watts probably wrote this note at home after sorting out Dieter and the alarm, and maybe one more thing. Isn't this the day that Watts got a supply of oxy from the basement? So think about this. Watts writes this note, and this note is basically a follow-on from the argument that they had on July 14th, where she felt like, am I always going to be second best? We know that 2 weeks after writing this note, Kessinger still felt like that, because it's what she said in a text to Charlotte. So we know even on the day of the murders, Kessinger felt insecure about, am I going to be second? So this thing is a very strong thing, and it wasn't just strong with Kessinger that she wanted to be first, it was also strong in the sense that Watts had heard it, and this note is basically responding to it, saying, I hear you, I acknowledge what you're saying, we are having first, we have had first, and we will continue to have first, and I want to keep having them with you, exclamation, exclamation. And how can he make that happen? How can he keep having them with you? And so guess what happens? In this context where he's committed to delivering on this, he's aware of something that Kessinger isn't, which is that his wife is pregnant with a little boy. And I mean, the gender reveal is coming about right now. She's becoming aware that she's having a little boy, right? But he wants Kessinger to have his child, and Kessinger wants to have his child, and Kessinger wants to have a boy. Certainly this is what's being suggested. And so in Watts's mind, again, this is if it's true what has been said in the third confession, which does make sense, in his mind he's thinking, I can't let Shanann have this child, because it will then close the door on me having this first, the last first that I can have with Kessinger. That's no longer gonna happen. So I've got to make sure it does happen. And so that's kind of what is preoccupying his mind on his last day, his last full day in Colorado. So what does he do? He gets the oxy from the basement, and he begins the process of doing what he thinks he needs to do desperately to control the situation, which is to make sure that Shanann doesn't give birth to his unborn son. And so we see a direct connection between that and the idea of bringing about the miscarriage the very next day. I mean, it's the first day he was in North Carolina was the day after he wrote this note, right? The 31st. So just to reiterate, we know for a fact that he had the notion of first on his mind, first with Kessinger. We also know for a fact that Kessinger specifically didn't like the idea not only of being second to Watts's wife, but of having seconds in other respects, such as childbearing. She wanted to be first, and Watts wanted to give that to her, right? So just to refer to what I mentioned earlier on Discovery page 715, something I referred to in another video, on August 12th at 13:51, which is, as I say, hours before the murders took place, Kessinger was still saying, I just feel like I will always be second place, like he's been there, done that. She's talking about children, she's talking about the house, she's talking about his life. So So one must also look at it from the perspective of Shanann. Shanann also wanted to be first, and as a result of Nutgate, she even wanted Watts to have nothing to do with his own parents. So in a very short space of time, two women very close to him were sort of twisting his arm, saying, prove to me I'm number one in your life. Right? And so you had Nutgate on the one hand, a Dietergate on the other, and Watts is sort of caught in the middle, and he's got to prove himself in his mind, right? I'm going to just take a little bit of a sidetrack off the first narrative and just deal quickly with my favorite subject that I love to hate, which is the whole narcissism nonsense. If folks are adamant about narcissism and how narcissism relates to the Watts case, well, this is where it certainly does. Is it narcissistic to want to be treated as valuable by someone else? I want you to think about those words in terms of yourself. Is it narcissistic to want to be treated as valuable by someone else? When is it healthy narcissism and there is such a thing, by the way, when is it healthy narcissism to demand to be treated better, and when does it become unhealthy? Was it healthy for the mistress to want to be a priority? Was it healthy for Watts to not want to be in a marriage where he felt second best? So if we're talking about one shouldn't feel second best, does that apply to some people but not to others? Because if you take the letter of the law in terms of that you should never be second best, and you apply it to everybody, then how can everybody be not second best? Someone's got to come second best. In other words, if everyone is saying, I don't want to be second best, in practice, how does that actually work? Because then someone who's with you has got to be second best. And that's where this whole crazy aspect of it just shows how nuts it is. Sure, you can be dogmatic about not being second best in your life, but what about the person that's with you? I mean, does that, you not being second best in your life, does that mean you're going to have to be with someone who treats you like number one at the expense of themselves? Is that what you're saying? Because otherwise you're saying, no, let's be treated as equals, but then that's not making you number one. Then it's you're both number one, you're both equals. That's different. So we go back and we say, was it healthy for Shanann to demand that Watts sacrifice his relationship with his parents as a result of Nutgate, so that her hegemony over his existence could continue? We can see that this issue of how much we are valued isn't unique to the Watts case, it's universal. This is why conflating narcissism with true crime, or with this case in particular, makes no sense and reveals absolutely no insight into the authentic dynamics of this case whatsoever. This is because we are all narcissists, and the relevant narcissism in this story is no different to the narcissism in all our stories. So we can talk about narcissism in the Watts case, but it got no relevance to the actual crime or criminal psychology. And that's why it's so silly. I mean, you can talk about it, but then you're really talking about your own narcissism or your attitude to narcissism. That's not true crime. It's not true crime rocket science. There's no aspect of this case where narcissism really sticks out unless we bring it into the aspect of priority. And if anything, what Watts was doing is he was trying to give Kessinger priority, right? Almost at his own expense. And how is that narcissistic? So anyway, when I read the note, the word that stuck out to me was the word addicted. So I did notice the word first, but I didn't pay particular attention to it. The word addicted seemed to be more carrying more weight than anything else. Because sometimes people, when people are in love, they act like people who are drunk or on drugs. And you can get addicted to another person. You can feel like you are dependent on them for your happiness, or even that your life depends on being with them. The part I missed was the true significance of the firsts. While I was aware of him trying to reassure her of her priority in his life, especially with his departure to North Carolina imminent, I didn't realize what he was doing here was exactly what he was always doing, generally during the first confession, the second and the third. In other words, what Watts was saying through this note on July 30th was exactly what he thought Kessinger wanted to hear. He was saying what he thought she needed to hear. He was saying what he thought, if he said it, it would improve his chances with her. It would bring them closer to each other. It would strengthen their relationship. But regardless, he's nevertheless saying what, not necessarily what he wants to say, but what he thinks she wants to hear, and there's a difference. So not only does he say what he wants her to hear, but he knew that Nichol wanted to hear she was first. That was the thing she wanted most. And not only did he know that, he wanted to make that happen. It's not just that he wanted to say that. He didn't just want it to be words. He wanted it to be real. And the murders were about putting her first. Let me say that again. The murders were about putting her first. And again, think about that in the context of narcissism. How can it be narcissistic to want to put someone else first? Not first for him, first for her. She wants to be first, right? So the first thing he did when he got to North Carolina was try to get rid of Nico. That was so that she could give him his first son. Nichol knew he wanted a son, and at that moment it was the only thing Shanann hadn't quite given him yet. Little did Kessinger know that door was closing fast in her face as well. But Watts did know, and he wanted to close it. Part of Kessinger's desperation and urgency, I think, lay in the comparative reality that her best friend Charlotte was engaged and about to get married. So even in this you have kind of a, I won't say competition, but you kind of have a peer scenario where your friend is advancing through the narrative of her life. She's becoming an adult, she's getting married, and she's going to live happily ever after. And in that, even in that sort of spiel of two women who are friends, who've known each other for some time, Kessinger's feeling like she's falling behind. She's feeling like she's coming second, right? So there is a sense that Kessinger is struggling, I guess, with her love life, and she's effectively single while her best friend is engaged and about to get married. And so one has the impression that she wanted to snap her fingers and not be left behind. And the horrible manifestation of this Insta fairy tale was Watts magically transforming his home situation so that Nichol could walk right in, and his family would simply have vanished. Vanish is a word he used to the FBI and to the media on his sermon on the porch. The word vanish has magical undertones. Watts was trying to perform a magic trick to make his mistress happy, want him, and so that he deserved her. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and found a little bit of insight in it. If you have, please share the video with your networks. Please subscribe to the channel, click the bell, click like, and leave a comment. If there are other videos or other aspects that you'd like discussed, let me know. I won't be keeping this up much beyond October, but I've certainly got a couple of episodes I still want to get through once I get to that. You should just bear in mind I'm a writer, not really a YouTuber. So I'm really here to draw attention to my research ethic and my true crime rocket science, and that's really what I want to draw your attention to. For those who've been listening and enjoying the videos, you're going to get a lot more value in the narratives about this case. All of them available on Amazon Kindle, starting with the first book, The Man Underneath Christopher Watts. The total of 9 books. Oblivion and Annihilation are really well reviewed, as is Drilling Through Discovery. I'm working on a new series called Silver Fox, and that'll be coming out quite soon. And the ambit of that narrative is to interrogate the veracity of the third confession.
If I knew his wife was pregnant, I wouldn't be in this picture. So if his wife was not pregnant, and forgive me, but if he takes her out of the picture, you're never going to know that she was pregnant, right?
What do you mean takes her out of the picture? Like,
if he murdered her, she's out of the picture. You're never going to know if she was pregnant. If he can get away with murder, you're not going to. I got divorced from my wife. Do you understand what I'm saying here? If she's gone,
but this.
Don't lead.
Hypothetically.
Please. Don't lead on.
If she.
Okay.
You understand where I'm going. If
right,
you
but
didn't know.
You're leading into questions that are nothing with your.
If you didn't know, though.
Wait, Nick.
That she was there.
Did you hear what I said?
I'm following you. I just want her to answer a question that relates to. She said something that's important. That if he didn't have a child on the way, or if she didn't know that, she would have continued the relationship, right?
But he killed his kids. At what point does he think that I'm going to be in a relationship?
I'm not talking about the children. I'm just talking specifically about her. If you only knew, if the kids were still here, and he called you and said, "I'm divorced from my wife," and he gets away with this, do you understand what I'm thinking from his aspect?
I still wouldn't do it. I still wouldn't do it because I'd be like, where did she go?
Okay.
Because I'm under the impression that she's a really good mom. Like, he never bashed her momming skills. Like, no, I wouldn't, no.
Okay.
No.
And you see where I'm trying to take that?
Yes.
So, you guys never had a conversation about the child, period?
I didn't know at all.
And by your words, if you did know, you would have ended the relationship.
Well, because it wouldn't have made sense to me that he's like, I'm getting separated. Oh, by the way, I have a baby on the way. It's like,
15 weeks.
You are a liar. It's a huge.